Welcome, Houses and Hobbits viewers. This is a little bit of a side series that I wanted to put together with Alex, due to the fact that if any of you are aware, during the recordings of the original 4 or 5 episodes of Houses and Hobbits, Alex had not watched Game of Thrones in any capacity beforehand, so he was always kind of the question guy.
Super confused, yeah.
Sometime during 2020, over a period of a couple of months, he was able to watch through the entire series. So I wanted to pick his brain and just chat with him. These are just going to be probably little 30-minute episodes, if even that. Just chatting about each season, so only going to be about 8 episodes of these tops. I might combine season 7 and 8 together just because everybody kind of already knows general consensus on those ones.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to start with, season 1, Alex. So coming into this, you were obviously a little bit more of a Lord of the Rings-ish fan, so you kind of had like that soft fantasy sorry. But,
I mean, if I may, I think the biggest reason was that's what I knew, right? Mm-hmm. I grew up with Lord of the Rings. I think the very first Lord of the Rings actually that I watched when I was young was the Twin Towers.
Really?
And I just remember, there's this random old dude falling down a hole, and there's this huge horrifying thing trying to kill him, and they're like yelling and gurgling. I was always confused, but it was really exciting because that's
it's really cool.
It got me into it. I had no clue who those characters were, and I had no clue what was happening. But then we suddenly cut to this short, hairy-footed man waking up in in a fog, and he's like scared. And then this other blonde, man comes over, and he's like, "Are you alright, Mr. Frodo? Are you okay?" And then there's this creepy dude that's like, "We have to go this way, hobbitses," and it's and he's on a leash for some reason. It was a very strange introduction, but that's what I grew up with. And then I realized it was a trilogy, and that was the second one, so I wanted to watch the first one and the third one. And ultimately, that's Lord of the Rings that I knew, and that's where my fantasy and love for fantasy kind of came from. And so the idea that, Game of Thrones was this brand new...
So before Houses and Hobbits, did you ever really have any interest before? I don't even remember. This year has been such a
absolutely
blur to me. I don't even remember. Was there any interest before I kind of pushed you towards trying to watch that?
So I had seen, obviously, clips. Game of Thrones was huge, in the years that it was coming up on HBO, and, everyone was waiting for the next episode, the next season, who's Jon Snow? Oh my God, is he going to live? That phrase was thrown on the internet everywhere. And so I was obviously... I'd heard of it, and it was fantasy-like, so there really wasn't a reason for me not to have been into it, but it was just something that I never was like, I'll take the time and watch through it. I don't know, I just had, I guess, a lot more going on, other things I was watching, other things I was, into at the time that, Game of Thrones somehow eluded me. Mm. But no, I think I always was interested in it, and I think I should have been way more into it, but I guess I just didn't have... that, how you have a person that gets you into things, they're so excited about something. I don't think I had a person for that specifically.
I didn't push you very hard, and obviously by the time I would have pushed you, I was over it.
Right.
Because season 8 happened, and we'll get to that when we get to that.
Yeah, that's a whole episode.
That's a whole thing unto itself. Yeah. But let's take a step back. Let's start with the good. Let's start with season 1. Yeah. Let's start with what was that like coming up, and let's just focus on the first episode.
Sure.
Because that was always what hit me the first time somebody showed me the first episode. And they showed it to me probably a year and a half before I finally came back around and said, "Hey, remember that show where at the very end of the first episode, one of your main characters got shoved out of a window?"
Yeah. Dude, rip Bran's legs.
Yeah. Like no other show in my recollection and that I've seen it began in such a way where you have all of this intrigue being set up from the very beginning. And upon watching it the first time, obviously, I don't know any of the names of these people. No. It's so confusing. If you don't come in with a crash course...
Like you've read the books or anything.
Anything.
Yeah.
Because, the weirdest scene for me in that first episode is where... you have Jaime Lannister and Cersei, and they're in the throne room, and you have Jon Arryn's dead body on the table. And you're like, what is going on? Why are there rocks with eyeballs on his face?
Immediately thrown into
just immediately thrown in.
Like, there could have been so many episodes before this, right?
Their whole dialogue is, oh, you worry too much. Oh, you don't worry enough. And ever since we were kids at Casterly Rock, and you're like, where's Casterly Rock?
Who is this guy?
Who are you people?
What's happening? No, very confusing, especially for a first-time viewer, of anything. And, I think, to your point, too, of, the very end of that episode having a seemingly main character thrown out a window. Mm-hmm. Not only that, but you also introduce incest at the end of the very first episode as well.
Up.
And you're like, these two people who were talking about this dead guy with rocks are now banging, and their brother and sister, what?
And she's the queen, and it's just all very confusing.
It's like, what is happening? But it's interesting.
It's so interesting.
But what's interesting for me is the thing I remember most about the first episode had nothing to do with like the middle or even the end of the episode. Like, obviously I remember those, but the thing that continually grabs me is that beginning openings.
No, absolutely.
That absolute mystery of this giant ice wall, this big old gate, these riders going out talking about,
wildlings
and dark stuff, and you're like, whoa, what's going on up here? And then the bodies, and then you have the girl, and everyone's like horrified, like, ooh. And then you don't go back to that place for a couple episodes.
No,
you're just sort of like, what was that?
The next time you see the wall is when Jon arrives.
And then he's talking about the Night Watch, obviously, first episode too, and you don't even know that's what that was.
Yeah,
there's like no connection there other than the wall.
Enough of a connection.
You're like, what?
Once again, if you don't have some sort of understanding of what's happening, you're just completely lost.
Right. And I think one of the really cool aspects is right away they introduce both an antagonistic force in the White Walkers. Not the Wildlings, but the White Walkers. Because obviously the Wildlings
there were dead.
We're like, well, the Wildlings were supposed to be the threat. Who killed them if not you, right?
Yeah.
And then you also have this idea of magic with, this girl being brought back to life and like murdering people. She had blue eyes.
Yes.
It's like, whoa, like, this isn't just your normal shield
and
sword and arrow kind of.
They hadn't set in stone the full design that they wanted to have for the White Walkers, so the little bits you see of them, and I mean, if you actually freeze the one frame where it actually shows the face as it's attacking one of the Night's Watchmen, it looks completely different from what the final design looks like.
Yeah, and we waited quite a while for the White Walkers proper to arrive. We just got the undead.
The first season that we finally saw them in their glory was the final episode of season 2.
Right, yeah.
So
quite a lengthy build-up.
That's
but I think
decent amount of time.
A necessary build-up, I feel like, for that kind of force. And they're not even the final antagonist of that group. That's just the group, right?
Yeah,
we don't get to see the Night King for
4 or 5
a long
seasons.
Time.
I can't remember.
His build-up is insane.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll get to him as we go.
Seasons, sure.
But so coming off of, a Tolkien-esque fantasy into Game of Thrones, and it's not to say that Tolkien doesn't have killing or things happening that are bad.
Plenty of murder and
plenty
happening.
of it happens, obviously. It's not as much to our main heroes.
No.
But it's different. The way that it's filmed especially is different. You actually see the man getting beheaded by Ned Stark. You have this whole thing where the kids are brought along to this, and he makes an important thing where Bran's 10, he has to learn at some point, and it's an important lesson of, if you're in leadership, you have to be willing to put your put your actions where your words are.
Yeah. What's the phrase? Like
the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword.
Yeah. Oh, that's so
and
metal.
and that is it. No, it's super metal, and it's a great indication of honor throughout, like everybody's character arcs. We get into Joffrey later in the season, especially.
Can't see it, but I'm rolling my eyes so hard.
Yeah. With Joffrey, he is always passing sentences, but he always makes somebody with more finesse swing the sword.
Sure.
Joffrey never does most of his killings himself.
I mean, clearly, look at the Baker boy and the Hound, right?
He sends the Hound after the Butcher's boy, excuse me.
Butcher's boy, yeah.
Yeah, no, you.
And Butcher boy doesn't even disarm him. Someone else disarms him, and he blames the Butcher boy.
Dire Wolf, and it's just this whole power thing with Joffrey. Just so back to that, the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword is a very big theme of just this honor. Yeah. And you see that people who don't live by that phrase, they have a lot of issues in their personal life and in their ruling life.
Outside of the Starks, there's
Outside
very
of the Starks.
few honorable, I would say. Maybe not. I mean,
there are some honorable people.
There are, but the Starks truly are like the family that embody that honor, right? Like, and
they are meant to be our main protagonists that we are rooting for,
right?
And
season one,
season one just kind of. Let's just focus on season one,
sure,
because that is. Ned Stark is the epitome of what you think of as your fantasy protagonist. And by all means, he almost solves all of the mysteries of the show really quickly.
Yeah.
Like, straight up, if he had been able to do everything the way he should have done it, either King Robert would still be alive, or Ned himself would be on the Iron Throne pending, say, Gendry or somebody like that being legitimized in a way that, the next Baratheon can be on the throne.
So many Baratheons.
And exactly. You had so many of the bastard Baratheons, as well as he was trying to give it to Stannis, which Stannis doesn't fully get introduced until season 2. He's just only mentioned by name, and then of course you have Renly, who
we all love Renly.
We liked Renly a lot. There was some issues with his logic when it came to the succession.
Well, obviously he wasn't next up for it, right?
No,
that's his whole thing.
He was the third in line amongst his own family, and then by Robert's own logic, he thought Joffrey and Tommen were his sons.
His legitimate heirs, if you would. Yeah. And once that whole thing came full circle, where Jon Arryn was doing the similar research and why he had to be killed because, and then I think that's when you start to realize, they're going to disgrace the honor of the Starks with Ned.
Absolutely.
And that starts to turn your head. You're like, you're worried. You're worried about it. And they do such a good job. Is it still season 1 where, no, he confronts... it's not still season 1, is it?
It's still season 1,
that he confronts the... Ned gets the golden guard on his...
No, that's still season 1, buddy.
Okay, and...
Episode 9's when Ned gets beheaded.
Yeah, and, they leave you with this, I think there's an episode that ends where, he has, what he needs, everything looks like it's going to work out in his favor, and then everything just spins
where Baelish turns the tables on him.
Baelish, dude. God, and it's interesting because they almost give him a revival arc every season, and then every season he does something.
He goes lower.
Yeah,
he goes lower every.
Well,
season.
you think he's a good guy, then he's not. He's a good guy, no, he's not. He's a good guy, no, he's not. And then ultimately, it's he's just.
Baelish isn't a good or bad guy. Legitimately, Baelish is just a guy. His monologue in season 3. Chaos is a ladder. He's just a guy trying to climb the ladder of ruling.
Sure.
And
he's got some really underhanded ways of doing it, which is,
absolutely.
I guess, why I see him as. But again, this is a great conversation for another season. I think season 1 really just stood to me as as confusing as the first couple episodes are. It does have a nice It has a lot of moments where loops close, where you find out who Jon Arryn is, why he's important, what his marriage and the Reach is, how that interconnects to the throne, right? Why Robert's on the throne.
You have a lot of good stuff with that in early seasons, where the mysteries, there are certain mysteries that are obviously throughout the entire series, and then you have the ones that are just more season mysteries.
Yeah.
But they do a good job of that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I will give the creators, is that they are really good at adapting George R.R. Martin's work to television. Because when they were following what George was writing, and I can tell you as one who's read at least 3 of the 5 books.
Sure.
With the exception of a couple of things, so basically any of the named characters that are featured in the books, like that specifically, if you've ever read them, they actually have like a chapter where it's a Bran chapter, and then you turn over and
multiple perspectives.
Daenerys. Yeah, you have all the perspective. Anybody who has a perspective, they did a really good job. It's almost verbatim to some cases. Like I remember one scene where Tyrion is at the Night's Watch, early on. And
right, he visits
when he went up to visit Castle Black.
Right.
And this is before Catelyn Stark kidnaps him and takes him to the Vale.
Sure, which they get him on the way back.
Yes. But so he's there and he's talking with
John, isn't he?
Jeor Mormont and Yoren, and I don't remember if Benjen was in the room for that conversation. It was Jeor and Aemon. And they're chatting about it, and how many winters have you seen? And he said 8, no 9. Like he corrects himself, no 9, and that piece of dialogue was ripped straight from the book. Like even to the point that he corrected himself.
Right.
Like they did a really good job of trying to follow it as closely as possible, with a few exceptions. Obviously, you get to see points of view that weren't featured. Like there's obviously that moment where Baelish and Varys are hashing it out in the throne room as they wait for the small council to meet.
Yes.
And I believe it was the one that Robert was actually going to show up for, because they had heard about Daenerys being married.
Those are just some of the best, just outside of the context of like characters and plot lines, just those isolated conversations between those two philosophies and ideologies of gaining rank between those two. I think those are some of the best scenes that Game of Thrones.
No, and that's the other thing.
And they're so simple. And that's the beauty of them. They're so simple. No special effects, no big scary things. Just two men talking about how they've come so far.
Well, that just adds to the intrigue of Game of Thrones. Is that yes, it's a fantasy series, but it's a fantasy series where magic isn't as big, especially in the world, because magic has kind of died out due to the fact that there are no dragons in the world.
Which makes this particular time period with the reoccurrence of dragons, emblematic of the magic's not dead. In fact, it's coming back stronger than ever. If that's a phrase I think they say at some point in the first season.
I can't remember.
Something about there being dragons in the magic in the world is becoming more, whatever.
Yeah. No, and that's more of a season 2, because the dragons aren't born until Drogo is burned on the pyre at the end of the season.
That's right. Season 2.
I'm trying to think. Speaking of those simple scenes, one of my absolute favorites, because of when you look at it from the context of everything that comes after it, and even what comes before, if you're familiar with it, is I love the scene where Robert and Cersei are talking. And it's the first real talk they have. Not him slapping her, not him, saying blah, 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 go beat Joffrey for me or something like that. It's a legitimate conversation that they have. And part of what brings it up is Lyanna Stark. And to those of you who've read the books or watched the show in its entirety, you know that name means a lot to the lore of that show and that universe. But that was Robert's first love. That was the woman he wanted more than anything else.
He was promised, wasn't he?
Yeah, they were betrothed because that was, the alliance between the Starks and the Baratheons was due to, like, not just to that, but that was one of those things that was going to keep that alliance going. Mm. And then, of course, Rhaegar Targaryen, kidnapped, raped her, stole her, all of these things.
A woman willing to go to war for.
I was going to say she was the Helen of Troy for Robert. Yeah. And that's what started the whole rebellion. And, of course, she died, unfortunately, and all of that came to pass.
And that's why eventually he and Cersei,
And he and Cersei eventually get married because, well, he's a new king on the throne and he needs money. So, of course, he takes a bride from the Lannister clan.
Right.
And Cersei is the one to bring up Lyanna Stark.
Sure.
And, of course, he gets to the point where he's like, you know what, the terrible truth is I don't even remember what she looks like. Mm. This woman who I loved with all my being, I don't even remember what she looked like.
Very what was it all for kind of speech.
Exactly. And he asks Cersei, well, why did you bring her up? You've never once asked about her. Mm. And she finally says the phrase, what harm could Lyanna Stark's ghost do to either of us? Which I find ironic for later.
Incredibly ironic.
In later stuff down the road.
Sure.
But I love that scene because they almost have this moment, and she asks him, could it have ever worked between us? Could there have ever been a good relationship between you and I? And he basically just says no. And I think in the context of that, and I don't always understand all the full nuance, but I feel like in that moment Cersei was maybe trying to give Robert an out. She had decided in her mind that he was fat and stupid and needed to be off the throne, and so she was going to do everything in her power to kill him. Whether that was, having Lancel give him wine so he gets gored by a boar. Right. All that stuff.
Robert's death, I feel, is half on him and half on her.
Yeah. But so in that moment, I almost feel like she's trying to reach out for something. And she's so complex, in my opinion. She has these really pure evil moments, but also there are moments like that where I almost feel like she was trying to be human. Like she was
sure
trying, and it obviously wasn't good for on his end.
I mean, regardless of how you look at her character arc, she has multiple opportunities, I think, to be, better, to not, rule as others have, right? Wrathfully, seething, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe it's her fault sometimes. Sometimes it's outside of her control, but that informs what she does next. Mm-hmm. That, she just gets angrier and angrier with the world, and she just becomes more and more isolated with those she loses.
Oh, for sure.
And, that messes a person up. So, and honestly, if, her arc in King's Landing is anything like her childhood, which I think it parallels pretty well, she's never had a lot of people around her. In fact, that's why, her and her brother are so close, because that's really the only person. At the end of the day, she really trusts. You could maybe make an argument for Tywin, but I don't.
The thing with her that just is another complex thing, and I want to talk about that when we get to season 3 and 4 specifically. But I will say with her and Tywin, it's always that. As much as she loves Jaime, and sometimes I feel like she just thinks she loves Jaime because he never pushes back against her bad decisions because he loves her. He genuinely loves her.
Yeah, I think he.
But with Tywin, it's like she is the most responsible and she listens to his lessons more than the other two do. Tyrion's smart, but when it comes to his father, obviously he's going to shit on his father as much as possible because his father has shit on him.
Sure.
For reasons that aren't really his fault.
No.
And Jaime just doesn't take the legacy of the Lannisters seriously, unless it's just him and Cersei. And so with that, Cersei has always felt like she wishes she could have been the son that Tywin always wished he actually had.
Right, because the 2 sons he has, he's not happy with.
No,
nor are they.
Because Jaime's big thing, and this was a thing before even season 1's timeline begins, is that Jaime always wanted to be in the Kingsguard, and on top of that, because of the fact that Cersei was originally going to be promised to a Targaryen prince,
right.
that would have gotten him close to her. So, whatever. But with that comes the fact that he cannot inherit Casterly Rock.
Right, he can't inherit it.
So that's just always been a big thing with Jaime.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah. Ugh, crazy.
Lannisters, they're crazy. One character we haven't gotten to yet is the one across the narrow sea, Miss Daenerys Targaryen.
Oh yes, of course. The whole other
side of the world.
Right.
Now, I like her season 1 arc. I really do. I find it fascinating.
She goes from so oppressed and sad and alone and used to being this matriarch of in Drogo's clan. What are
the Dothraki?
Yeah, and completely one-upping her brother, completely, taking on this role of queen and being genuinely excited for it. She loved that man. They had a really rough beginning.
No, they had a rough start.
Clear reasons. Thank goodness for that slave, that she talked to, and, she spoke, if he wanted a Dothraki.
Well, and don't get me wrong, the slave helped, obviously.
I think that counsel was incredibly important.
The counsel was very important that she gave her.
Yeah.
But also, good on Drogo for being the way he was after a certain point.
Sure.
Because he eventually got to the point where he was comfortable letting his wife kind of take command in some cases. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, he obviously attributed some of that to the baby because he was like, oh, it's the stallion who mounts the world in my wife's belly. Oh, it's filling her with his spirit. And it's like, okay, dude, whatever.
We get it. You have seriously deep-set beliefs.
You have deep-set beliefs that, her power is coming from a man that you put in her belly, yada, yada.
Sure.
But good on him for being willing to stand up for her in the ways that he did, because eventually his Khalasar starts to get...
Yeah.
Furious. She's refusing to let us, take our slaves and our booty.
What the hell?
What is this?
That's our whole point.
We go around, we pillage, we take.
But
what's ours?
She was ultimately changing the culture. And the ones that stuck with her really, really stuck with her. I mean, the ones that abandoned her, who cares about them? They're gone.
Yeah.
But the ones that were with her,
she probably inevitably killed all the ones that abandoned her down the road.
More than likely. No, absolutely more than likely. But yeah, she was a commanding force. And, you really start to feel for that family. You start to want them to have, this baby. You want her to, actually conquer the way she wants to do it.
Is Khal Drogo... Because I obviously already knew about Ned Stark, going in when I first watched Game of Thrones. I didn't think it was going to happen until season 2, the way his arc kind of went, and then, obviously, Baelor happens, and there it goes. His head's chopped off. Khal Drogo was my other go-to guy that I was kind of rooting for,
really excited
because of the fact that it would help Daenerys move her stuff along. And then when he gets sick and when he dies,
standing up for her, mind you,
standing up for her,
literally walking in front of her, getting cut, and being like, "I'm fucking tough, dude."
Yeah,
and you're not gonna.
What a great fight scene too. I loved that scene.
Yeah, dude.
But
Jason Momoa.
It's still so hard to believe that even after that, it took him a little bit longer.
Struggled to find work.
It was still hard for him to find work after that. So I'm very glad to see him as Aquaman. Just living the life
going
he wants to
for
live,
it, man. Good for him.
But he was seriously, like, when he fell ill, that was just...
Yeah. And
what?
And I think that was the thing, too, is like, oh, illnesses never kill characters. Pfft, magic's in the world.
Well, exactly.
And you're like, it's so easy to deal with, right?
Especially what we'd seen up to that point. It's like, oh my gosh, he's going to die from a sickness?
Yeah. And then the magic shit started.
Yeah.
Right? All the black magic stuff. And I'm like, okay, great, cool, that'll work.
Keep him alive, and then it's just like, oh...
You're a terrible lady.
Well, it's not even that.
I get it, though. I get why she did it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I get it.
No, her explanation makes sense. Obviously, Daenerys isn't happy about that.
Well, she's lost a lot. She lost two.
She lost her son and him in that.
Well, I mean, she technically got him, but that... Oh.
Yeah, the description of that.
God.
But that also gives us a glimpse into magic and how it works.
Yeah.
Because
you want something?
You want something so badly, and you may not get.
What are you willing to give up
exactly?
For it? And what will you actually get?
Mm-hmm.
That's what dark magic said to me when I watched that scene is, you're gonna lose something for this, and it's not even necessarily gonna be what you originally wanted. Mm-hmm. It'll be along the lines of what you wanted. Oh yeah, you'll have him alive. But that doesn't mean you're going to have him back. And I was like, I think that's the difference between dark magic and other magics perhaps in the world is that, dark magic's going to take more and it's not going to give you as much. And that was incredibly hard to watch because you're rooting for her at that point.
Exactly.
I don't know, early on in the season when we first got introduced to Daenerys and all them, were you rooting for her to take back the Iron Throne? Or were you kind of just like...
I was rooting for her...
Who is this lady?
That's the thing. Is like season 1 Daenerys is probably still one of my favorite seasons of Daenerys.
Yeah.
Because it's so refreshing to see her as what she is at the start, where she's just so timid and she's being abused by her brother in ways that are just awful, and he truly is the worst, and I'm so glad that he didn't get the opportunity to be king or ruler of anything.
Yeah, never deserved it.
And he never deserved it.
It's really sickening, and you learn obviously about Rhaegar a lot later in the seasons, but it's amazing to me that those are both his children. Viserion and Daenerys. Yeah.
So no, Aerys had 3 children.
Right.
Rhaegar, her older brother.
Oh, that's right. They're siblings.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me that those are siblings of Rhaegar. Mm-hmm. Because Daenerys is like, I think...
Which Daenerys early on, it at least makes sense. She loves people. She loves the poor. She fights for causes that make sense.
She makes sense
us.
as a ruler. Viserion is just more of the same, except worse than Robert, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
I don't think Robert was a good king, but like
he wasn't malicious.
He kept the peace
to the best of his ability.
At the very least, he lost a lot of money. He just didn't do a lot, but he kept the peace.
Yeah. He was a warrior king.
Yeah,
that was it.
He fought his way to the throne and held it through strength. Mm-hmm. That's what Robert did. Viserion is just this ugly little...
Viserion is what Joffrey could have been.
Yeah, I feel like they go hand in hand.
I mean, Joffrey is what Viserys could have been. So it's very interesting to see that.
Yeah, underhand, slimy, just ugh.
And then one other last character that we really kind of left off was Jon Snow.
Early on, Jon Snow. Obsessed with the wall, obsessed with service.
So here's my thing: is Jon Snow season 1 it's so funny because as the series goes on, Jon Snow becomes my favorite. As the series goes on, Daenerys loses luster for me. By this time season 6 rolls around, they Jon's obviously my homeboy. He's my absolute favorite. Yeah. I find Daenerys to be full of spectacle, and she's got some really cool stuff, but I don't like her. Jon in season 1, I can't stand him. I can't stand how petty he is, and I love that his early time at the Wall and some of his interactions with Tyrion really make him start to see the world the way he should. It's like, look at all these guys. You were raised in a castle.
Yeah.
You were the bastard son of a lord.
That humble slap from TV.
You may have been a bastard in your own home, but you were still the bastard of a lord.
Right.
These guys, they're all farmers, rapers, thieves. None of them have ever held a sword in their life, and you're kicking the shit out of them.
Yeah, because you were trained with a sword.
Because you were trained.
Privileged.
You knew. And why does that make you better than them? And even Benjen says, you're better than no one.
Right.
Because he says, I can't wait until I'm a ranger so I can go out and join you.
And Benjen being lead ranger was always like, ooh.
Yeah. And he's like, well, you're not ready yet, but I'm better than everybody else. And you're better than nobody.
Right.
You get what you earn. And same with the rest of your brothers.
Him and Sam Tarly's relationship is what actually keyed me into thinking that Jon Snow was like going to be a long-term.
Yeah, for sure.
And
that's one of those moments where it finally kind of starts to make Jon a decent human being, in my opinion.
I'll be honest with you, and I think this is what the showrunners wanted in some cases. I didn't give a crap about Jon Snow. I wanted to get, whenever we were at the wall with Jon, I was like, I want to get away from the wall.
Right?
I don't care.
Early seasons, you're bored.
I don't care.
You're bored every time you go to the wall.
He's going to kick some shit out. He's going to hold things, whatever. I fell in love with Robb Stark.
Yeah.
Robb Stark was the guy.
Robb Stark was
He was
that
Eddard's son. He was going to call the banners. Like, yeah, he was young, but he was the young wolf. Like,
that King of the North scene in episode 10.
He's still my King of the North, personally.
Yeah. That King of the North scene at the end of, or in episode 10 is, seriously, it gets me every time.
Yeah.
Because it just, once again, it just feels like what you think the fantasy should be.
Yeah.
Is, okay, Robb's father, honorable man, was
Absolutely.
just killed by this dumbass little shit stick.
Yeah.
And obviously he has a right to go to war because we know that Ned was not a bad person. And so that moment when you have, all of the Lords of the North, you have Theon Greyjoy, which, you're hoping such good things out of this moment for the Greyjoys as well, because Theon, is in with the Starks.
Right.
All this good stuff seems like it's going to be on the horizon for Robb Stark. And so, it makes it so good.
Yeah.
So, no, I understand why people love Robb Stark.
Yeah. He's just, God. He was the Stark I thought would, and this is, silly me not knowing, all the seasons.
What you now know.
Right. But, Robb was the end game for me. He was the guy who was going to bring the entirety of North down on King's Landing, save his sister, show Joffrey what it means to be a true king, and then perhaps secede the North from the rest of the kingdom. And he was going to be the king of the North. That was Robb Stark for me, and I didn't know necessarily how it was going to go or what would transpire, but I knew that was a very possible end game for Robb's arc. And yeah, I watched him very closely in other seasons. I think it's season 2, but I'll touch on it because it's our next episode. But when he's just you see Catelyn Stark and she's looking around, she's looking for Robb, she can't find him.
Oh no, that's season 1.
Is it still season 1?
I believe so. It's right after Ned died.
And he's just hitting that tree. And she goes, Robb, you ruined your sword. And he just needs his mother in that moment. Like, that is the most, and it might sound counterintuitive, but that is the most masculine thing in my mind, is a man who cares so much for his father, and he can do nothing for him. His father, he can do nothing for him.
I get so emotional at that scene every time.
I think, and those two actors,
though they rocked it.
That was what made Game of Thrones like, I'm going to watch this till, I don't care what the ending is, I'm going to watch this all the way through, because this is the kind of moments I look for in fantasy.
Yeah. No, that's the thing, is that overall, like, the whole series, the actors were phenomenal.
Absolutely.
All of them were cast perfectly.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to think of anybody who was actually a weak link, in my opinion. Like, the only people that, like...
Sansa. In the family, not as a character.
In the family, not as a character.
No. Wonderful actress. Absolutely.
Like, the only thing people might complain about is maybe like Ed Sheeran's cameo.
I loved Ed Sheeran's cameo.
I loved it.
I thought that was so cool. I was like, he's singing great. There he is. Oh, come on. He's from the area. Of course you're going to invite Ed Sheeran to come and do a song, a little ditty. Oh, God.
So, no.
No, that was a cool little bit.
But no, like, even
Among the Starks, I want to say it's
Jack Gleason is his name.
The Hound?
No. That's Rory.
Oh, no, the guy that plays...
Joffrey.
Yeah, Jack Gleason, yes.
I am so sad at the backlash he got.
Oh, that guy did so well.
He did such an amazing
And that's why people hate him as a person.
No, and like that's the thing. He literally quit acting because of Game of Thrones.
I heard that, and obviously I don't know his real reasons because I don't know. I just saw an interview where he said like he never really enjoyed it in the first place. I don't know. But I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
That the backlash that he got from fans over his... And they couldn't separate him.
And it's the same thing with
like
Cersei, with Lena Headey. She talks about whenever she was in like the lines at Comic-Con, and people would skip over her because, well, I don't like your character. Oh. It's like... That's the point.
That's the point. You should love me as the actress.
You should love me because
I make you feel really this intense emotion. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Because even the good guys, they make us feel intense emotions. Richard Madden makes us feel intense emotions.
Richard Madden, dude. Oh, man. What a wonderful choice.
No, he did fantastic.
Dude, yeah, no. Robb Stark will forever... In my head, he will always be King of the North. He just always will be. He's the only one who wanted it. Not like wanted it like I'm gonna be it, but like he like took it in stride and was like, I will be this for you, and I will be this king.
Because once again, it was also just kind of given to him by the people of the North.
Yeah.
The only thing he wanted was vengeance for his father, and then out of him winning a couple of good battles, especially one where he captured Jaime Lannister. He was respected, and he was, this is somebody we could follow.
He was raised right. He really was.
He was.
Yeah. And I don't want to say Jon wasn't, but like he was born to go and be.
Jon's issue wasn't necessarily that he wasn't getting enough of Ned's love; it's that he wasn't getting a mother's love.
Right.
That's the thing. Is you look at
him and
you look at Robb and Kat. Mm-hmm. Besides, like a little bit of season 2 and a beginning of season 3. You have this inseparable. He trusts her with his life, with everything.
Right. She
is the person he sends into the twins to get Walder Frey to allow them to go across the bridge.
Screwed that pooch. So yes,
screwed that pooch. We'll get there.
We will. Young wolf, screw the pooch.
Trying to think any other last things I want to...
I know I'm hard pressed always to find the Stark I like least. I love the Starks. I
think my least favorite is honestly Bran, but that's...
Really?
Yeah, Bran was always my... Well, technically, Rickon is my least favorite just because he doesn't get to do anything.
No, that guy is a sad story.
But of the...
Well, besides the ghost stuff in the beginning, I still like him for all that. Like,
yes.
He was also seeing some stuff.
Yes, he was having the same dreams that Bran was
But Bran's obviously going to be like this end game, right, sort of thing, and Rickon's like...
Bran was just always the most boring... story out of all of them.
Really?
Out of all of them.
Including
in the books. Yeah. We'll get to season 8.
We will. No, I always like Bran. And mostly...
I think he's an endearing person.
Yeah.
I don't find his story intriguing.
I think what made me like Bran specifically is because Jojen passed on a legacy to him. Mm-hmm. And I loved Jojen.
Jojen was awesome.
Jojen, that entire family, which we don't get enough of.
We don't get enough of the Reeds.
But the Reeds are low-key underrated and probably one of the cooler families in the North. Better than the Boltons. But that's... Obviously, I love the Boltons, but for very different reasons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, no, season 1 was, I think, a wonderful gateway to everything else because the moments in that secured me for the rest of it.
And we can come back to a little bit of the parts that we didn't talk about as we go into season 2.
We're going to jump around.
The hardest thing here is that we're trying to stay in season 1 with stuff that we have to think about in the coming seasons. Mm-hmm. So, but I was just very happy that this year you got to watch all of that. And I obviously watched the ending with you again.
Yeah.
But it was nice to see and hear your reactions, and I just thought we should record those.
I sent some wonderful texts
for the sake of everybody who now, going forward in Houses and Hobbits, will know that like
I'll know what we're talking about.
Basically,
and can jump in
Houses and Hobbits going forward is going to be so much more of a discussion rather than this Q&A that I felt like it kind of turned into in some cases towards the ending of each episode, so to speak, because of the fact that you didn't know Game of Thrones. Not truly. Ryan at least knew Lord of the Rings to an extent.
Right.
But you didn't really know anything about Game of Thrones, so
No.
So I'm glad we can now share that.
Much more in-depth
It'll make that conversation much better.
Yeah.
Because it'll be a three-way conversation rather than just me and Ryan talk about Game of Thrones.
Right.
So,
right.
So with that, I think I'm going to sign off for this little mini-sode that we're doing, and it probably turned into a lot longer than I anticipated, and maybe they'll all turn into that. So, but thank you for listening, anybody who's listening at home, and tune in for the next one. And then after that, hopefully we'll be kind of doing these every other with Houses and Hobbits once we continue that series.
Yep. So we'll see you in the near future.
Hit that like button and subscribe, please, and just keep an eye out. Thank you very much.
Bye.